I've been reading this book. This is from the 1830s, and it's by a medical missionary named Asahel Grant. And he's an American, and he went to the Assyrian people. And he calls them the Nestorians. They called themselves Nestorians at that time, as well as Assyrians. And he calls them the independent Assyrians because technically the Ottoman Empire, you had the Persian Empire, but at the time the Assyrian people, really no one was exercising authority over them. They had their own, maybe not recognized, but they had de facto, at this time, they had de facto independence. And the Kurds at this time were just a bunch of criminals, thugs, and highwaymen. He talks about it. Not to disparage the Kurds as a whole, even the Kurdish people today, but this is what, he had to travel through these lands. And the Kurds would as soon as slit your throat as look at you. And a lot of them were just thieves and raiders and marauders. So he exposed himself to great danger, but as a physician, he was able to, and a medical missionary, he's able to do a lot because they needed physicians. They need medical doctors over there, so he's able to accomplish a lot. And he's very, I knew this book a long time ago. I wish I already had read through it, but I just recently got it. Very interesting reading. And I want to mention something else. I want to look at this book. I found this a very charming book written by George Lambza. We can see a picture of him in the back of the book. And this is called The Kingdom on Earth, and it's a meditation on the Sermon on the Mount. And I think the Sermon on the Mount is very sublime and deep, and it's about how we should live, Christian ideals. And if people actually did that, lived according to the Sermon on the Mount, the world would be a better place. I remember Barack Obama was speaking derisively and mocking the Sermon on the Mount. It's like, how could anybody live like that? Well, you should. Love your neighbor, turn the other cheek, things like that. But there's a time and a place for everything. We should have these ideals and principles. And we might not be able to attain that high level of morality, right? But we should strive towards it, right? We should strive towards the moral example of Jesus Christ and the teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. If we fail, at least we should have these principles that we direct our lives towards. So this is a nice, charming little book. And he says here, this is on page 147, he's talking about, some of the prayers I heard as a little child were vehement supplications to God to speed the coming of the Russians to deliver my people, the Assyrians, from the Kurds. When hopes for Russian intervention on their behalf vanished, I heard them praying for the coming of the British to deliver them from the Turks. Eventually, the British did not take over, but our prayers are still unanswered, and our difficulties have multiplied. The people are now refugees scattered everywhere. Poverty and suffering are even greater than in former days. Today, we realize our mistakes in praying, and we do not know why our conditions are not better. Our prayers were in our own selfish interest. We should have prayed for the Kurds and the Turks as well. They were our neighbors, and they could have helped us better our conditions if the attitude towards them had been changed. But instead, we trust in the arm of man. The human arm is made of flesh and blood, and it often errs. I disagree with George Lambza. I respect him. I respect his opinion, but I'm going to illustrate why he's wrong. He left that region. He saw the horrors. I believe he left in like 1916. Maybe he didn't see the worst of it. He got out before. And what happened is he was given an education. And George Lambza was recognized as being very talented in academics. And he had a precocious mind, which they cultivated. So because of his doing well in academics and other reasons, he was able to escape before the worst things happened. But like I said, looking at Asahel Grant, just trying to help the people, to cure them of their diseases and bring the healing arts to the Assyrians mostly, but also to anybody in need. And he's under constant threat of death from the Kurds. These were very savage and barbaric people. The Assyrian people were also very fierce warriors, but in this climate, that enabled them to survive. So this is a great book. This is given to me by Dr. Robert Polician, and I think he paid for, says here, to Stephen Missick with best wishes, Robert Polician. He gave this to me in 99. This is an excellent book, and I'd recommend anybody who's interested in Aramaic studies, or the Assyrian people, should get a copy of this book. Joel Warda was a Protestant pastor. He's also an Assyrian patriot, and he also worked on behalf of the Assyrian people. And so he's talking about, this is written right after World War I, first published in 1924, and he's discussing what happened with the Ottoman assault against Assyrians, Greeks, and Armenians. I'm going to read this section here. It says, "But now we return to witness the awful tragedy of Urmia. Most of the people of the Nazlu district of the country beyond had escaped with the Russians. The vast majorities who dwelt in Urmia and Baranduz and Margavar and Targavar districts had no chance to flee. As the fear of the latter rose mostly from the attitude of the Persian Mohammedans, the first thought that entered into their minds was to leave all their possessions and make a run to the two centers where they thought we'd have protection." This happened, this is 1917, and then in 2017, the same thing happened, where the Assyrians had to drop everything and flee, this time to Erbil, but this is 100 years earlier. And I've talked about this. Since the dawn of Islam, every 50 to 100 years, like clockwork, you have the cycle of genocides, mass killings, mass murders, wars, jihad. Sometimes you have a few decades of relative peace and moderation, but since these practices come from their sacred texts, that's why, if they're instructed to do these things, they're going to do them. So it's a recurring nightmare, but it's fueled from the Quran, the Hadith. I didn't write the Quran, I didn't write the Hadith, and I'm tired of what these people have done for 1,400 years, and we have to work to stop it. And things are changing right now. It used to be that the Muslim world could keep information about just questions about Islam out. You know, Muslims aren't exposed to the gospel, right? They're able to prevent the truth of the gospel from coming in, or questions from being asked, right? They're able to stop that. Plus, you have fear, or they're going to kill you, right? But now 1 in 4 Muslims is leaving Islam. Now you got 1 in 4 people who were Muslim, 25% of them are leaving Islam around the world, in the Western world. And I was listening to a Muslim preacher talk about that. He says, 30 years ago, you have a Muslim that go to Europe, and only 1 or 2% would, question Islam or become a Christian. Now it's 1 in 4. And this trend is not like, they're saying that 50% of Iranians have renounced Islam, and that mosques in Iran are empty. Nobody goes to mosque anymore because Islam has been totally discredited by over 40 years of the rule of the mullahs, but also by the extreme actions of ISIS. So we need to speak against it. This is an opportunity. People are leaving Islam, and we need to leave Islam in the dustbin of history so we can have peace and tolerance and unity in the future. We can never have it with these doctrines which are written in their sacred texts. And then we should read about these atrocities and then we see it repeated. I'm telling you, I had this book about the Assyrian genocides, and I was reading it, and I couldn't believe it, the atrocities they committed. I was thinking, could this really have happened? Maybe this is exaggeration. But then, 100 years later, from 2015 to 17, they do another genocide. And this time they film it, and they upload it into YouTube. And it's like, well, they're doing the exact same thing I read about when I was doing research on the Armenian, the so-called, what was the Armenian genocide? The Armenian, the Greeks, and the Assyrians. All 3 groups are targeted. And you read these horrific stories, and they're hard to believe, but then 100 years later, they do this, like, wow, they're doing the exact same thing that Joel Warda and others wrote about. So let's listen to what they did here. So, these centers were the extensive building of the American mission in Urmia, and the smaller quarters of the French Lazarus monks. The only hope of the people's salvation was in these 2 flags, the Stars and Stripes and the tricolored flag of France. But could the people reach there? The flags were waving high in the city, and where the two mission buildings stood. Driven by the awful fear of the massacre, the trembling throngs took the roads that led to those distinct havens. But as they emerged from their homes and villages, they found other ways had been intercepted and blocked. They felt as if they had jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. Some of the inhabitants of the nearby villages, situated within a mile or two from the city, who had first heard of the Russians' retreat, managed to arrive in the city without much loss. To larger majorities, however, it could have taken 2 or 4 hours to make the journey, provided, of course, they continued the way unhampered and unmolested. I talked to people. I went to refugee camps in northern Iraq while all this was going on, and that's what happened. It's like ISIS is coming. These people had to run as fast as they could, whatever form of transportation, a bus, a car, a bicycle, a motorcycle, or if you just have to run and hope you can make it to Erbil. Why does mankind, we as a species, allow this evil to continue? And we're in trouble here in Texas. They're building a Sharia law enclave, a breakaway secessionist area outside of Dallas. We're going to have a Muslim-only Sharia law. They're going to create Pakistan and Saudi Arabia in the suburbs of Dallas. They're going to call this Epic City. And I went to school in Sugar Land, and we have this stretch of highway it's Highway 6, between 90 and Highway 10. That's where I went to high school, where I grew up. And now it's just lined with madrasas and mosques. So we're in Texas, because of our corrupt immigration, dangerous, foolish immigration policy, we're in danger here in Texas. Putting our freedoms, our liberty, our lives in danger from ideas that should be condemned and shunned, and now they're going to let them. And the governor, I wrote an edict, which is worthless. It's not worth the paper it's printed in. Are you going to do something to stop a Sharia law enclave from, Muslim no-go zones in Dallas, Texas? Our politicians and elected officials enable this to happen. And I'm writing my book, and I'm thinking about how the Assyrians run away, to the west. And Mar Emanuel, what happens to him? Well, because of these folly of these immigration, self-destructive, suicidal immigration policies, there's jihadis all over the place. So Mar is preaching the gospel, and it's like, how come Mar has such an international audience? Because he preaches moral truth and clarity against radical leftism. People want to hear a voice of condemning the abuses of the left and the immorality. Moral clarity. Why can't we preach moral clarity? Oh, that's too controversial. I don't want to get political. Well, people want to hear moral direction. He provides it. And then he's, speaks the truth about Islam. And what happens? He's preaching the gospel, and he has his eye. That man could have killed him. A jihadi comes in the church and stabs Mar in the face and puts his eye out. Could have killed him. And then we have Ashur Sharnaya. He's up and he flees to France. He's a TikToker, a podcaster, preaching the gospel. And on a live stream, he's doing a program preaching the gospel, and has his neck, you see, it's horrific. Has his neck slit right on, we have principles and beliefs and values of the West. I have a doctorate. I understand the value of education. But we have all these left-wing professors poisoning the mind of our children against human civilization. What is Marxism, communism? It's a system of exploitation. That's what it is. It's a system of oppression. So is Islam. That's what Islam... Looking at George Beltan, he made 2 arguments against Islam. This is in the 700s. He's Syriac Orthodox, but he's an Assyrian theologian. And he's looking at Islam. He's writing this commentary of the Gospel of Matthew. And he says, Muhammad appeals to the authority of the Gospels. But if the Gospels, which he appeals to the authority of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or the Diatessaron, whatever, it's the same thing. He appeals to the authority of our Gospels. He says they're true and valid, but they condemn him as a false prophet. That's the Islamic dilemma. Then he says, you look at Islam. Christianity, it's the true religion. The Sermon on the Mount, these ideals we should live by. It's hard, But Islam's the easy way. Take a bunch of wives. If you're on the battlefield, you can rape women. beat your wife. Things that we want to do instead of overcoming our baser instincts and desires, they incorporate these things into the religion. Shameful behavior. So Jesus said it's enough for a disciple to be like his master. So Muhammad, disrespects women, encourages violence. They're going to do it. So let's continue. But the whole country around had assumed a terrible aspect. Friends had become foes, and all the highways leading to Urmia city were swarming with packs of human wolves. They had come out for revenge, both to kill and to plunder. Revenge for what? We haven't really done anything to these people. Their societies have failed, and they're angry at us because of their own failures. It's your own fault. Why don't you change with the times? Why don't you learn from your betters? People who are obviously your betters. Look at you. People can't wait to get out of these Muslim countries. If the Quran and Hadith, the leading exporters, those regions, they're leading exporters of ignorance, violence, and poverty. If you want to destroy and cause civilization to crumble, just implement the ideas of the Quran and the Hadith. Afghanistan, the Silk Road, a highway of civilization, dotted with churches, synagogue, monasteries, Buddhists, Manichaeans, seminaries, schools of learning. And then the Islamic warriors get there, and look at Afghanistan now. Look at what they've done. When Afghanistan was more moderate in the 60s and 70s, when they become radical Muslims, look at Afghanistan. Look at what they've done. Look what they've done. Look what they've done to that. Not only to what Afghanistan used to be before Islam arrived, but when they try to implement true Islam as they see it, which they're correct. They're just going by their authoritative texts. So let's continue here. It was a wintry day with temperatures not far from zero. The fleeing throngs were literally stripped of their entire clothing, naked. Women and little girls, 8 and 10 years of age, were subjected to the most revolting outrages. Little children were stabbed with daggers or chopped to pieces by axes before the eyes of their frantic parents. Young virgins were assaulted while their helpless fathers were compelled to witness the hellish crime. Many of these refugees have fled back and sought the shelter of church edifices, thinking that perhaps Islam's passion might balk at the sight of the sacred shrines. Many of the refugees have fled back and sought the shelter of church edifices, thinking that perhaps Islam's passion might balk at the sight of the sacred shrines, which its adherents were accustomed to revere. But the malignant flood of crime knew no bounds. The Christians' holy Bibles were open on the pulpits, and their pages were desecrated by the committal of unmentionable deeds. The houses of Christian worship were first transformed into houses of ill fame, and then turned into human abattoirs. Naked, frozen, wounded, and bleeding, a remnant of the Assyrians managed to reach the havens which they were frantically seeking. Had the desire for greed and plunder been forgotten for a little longer by these Muslim brutes, perhaps the massacre would have surpassed in violence that of Tamerlane during his invasion of the same land centuries before. But as they were all anxious to be the first to enter the homes of Christians for a richer haul of plunder, they deserted the highways and got busy in the villages of their victims. They emptied every home of its entire contents and set the building on fire. So you read these stories about them taking Christian little girls, putting them on the altar over the sacred gospels, and ravishing these girls and then murdering them. Blood on the streets, blood on the walls. It's horrific. Why do we tolerate it? Why do we try to appease these people? Why do we affirm them? This is until David Wood and Sam Shamoon. Oh, let's just be nice and we like Quran, we like the Quran, we like the Hadith. Oh, Muhammad is a good person. Where did that get anybody? Muhammad blasphemes. He blasphemes. He attacks the Holy Trinity. He attacks Jesus Christ, his atoning death, his resurrection, says it never happened. I do appreciate George Lamas' book. It's a good read. But on this page, I think that's very naive. Seeing that this was what's going on, if you had the ability, and these Muslims are these Kurds and Turks are trying to ravish a little girl in front of your eyes. I mean, 9, 10-year-old children, you should defend yourself. Put a bullet through their head before you allow these atrocities to occur. And sometimes it's time to fight back. We have to do it. In conclusion, I want to mention Raymond Ibrahim, and he has a new book coming out in 2 weeks called Two Swords of Christ. And Raymond Ibrahim is a Coptic Christian. I've been to Egypt several times. I love the Coptic people and their history and culture. I appreciate it. But he's done a lot of work on history and the history of Muslim-Christian relations. And he looks at the past of Christians who rose up to fight against Islam. And, Christianity is constantly under attack. And, you get these debates and discussions. Like people say things like, the Salem witch trials or the Spanish Inquisition or the Crusades. Look at the Crusades. What does that say about Christianity? Rodney Stark wrote a book about the Crusades called God's Battalions. And a lot of things that these leftists say about the Crusades are not true. And, in every war, you're going to have atrocities committed. But if you look at it, the Crusades were just wars. And why should we feel guilty or ashamed about Christians fighting back? We recognize if Christians commit atrocities, that they're going against what Jesus did and said. At the same time, these leftists do not criticize, but they actually glorify it. They glorify it. And in our textbooks in schools, Christianity is disparaged. But when they look at jihad, the great Islamic empire grew and spread. How did it grow and spread? This is how Islam grew and spread. I'm going to have 2 books coming out soon. My book is called The Apostle of the Migrants, about ISIS and the Assyrian community. And I'm also going to have a book called Assyria, the Work of God's Hands. And I'm going to have a timeline in the back of the book. Like I said, every 50 to 100 years. And the fact of the matter is, when we have a reprieve, we have a sultan who's not out there doing it, that's because that sultan is not religious. He's not an observant Muslim. So he doesn't... See, that's the thing. It's like, look, we had this tolerant Muslim ruler, because he doesn't believe in Islam. He doesn't practice it. He's not a good Muslim. Therefore, he's not fighting jihad. And it's like, you got a moderate Muslim. We need moderate Muslims. I think in Egypt we have it with General Sisi, the current president of Egypt. And if there is a moderate ruler, I appreciate that. But they're not observing Islam. So what happens is you have one sultan or ruler who is a moderate, but unfortunately his son or grandson is going to rediscover all these laws on the books about fighting the infidel, and he's going to implement them. That's why we have this vicious cycle, and it's got to end. It's got to end. And now there's an opportunity, right? Muslims are being exposed to the truth, and many are leaving Islam, and we should encourage that. We should encourage it, because these behaviors, which are, we're not just, like I said, I was reading about this in a history book, and yet, unfortunately, we saw these things play out in front of our eyes. And you read these things, read that as they did these same things just in 2015, 16, 17. They did the same thing again. So, we need to learn, and we need to, like I said, we need to stop this forever. So I'm not one to mince words about it. I'm tired of it. I want to stop the killing. And they want us to be ashamed of what we believe as Christians. And yet they've done all these atrocities. Now, very, very soon, these 2 books are going to come out. And if you want to support my work, please get a copy. And, of course, I have other books out there. We got The Words of Jesus in the original Aramaic. And then my book on the lives of the 12 apostles. This is the further Acts of the Apostles according to Abdias of Babylon. I did a second version, which is improved and expanded. It's called The Lives of the 12 Apostles according to Abdias of Babylon. It's the Abdias of Babylon series. I'm going to have the Coptic and Ethiopic traditions of Abdias coming up soon. But editing is a time-consuming and tedious process, so I can only work so fast. I got a lot of work to do, but it's important for us to get this information out there to make these things more accessible. So support my work, but also I encourage you to check out Raymond Ibrahim's work, and I recommend this book, The Flickering Light of Asia, by the Assyrian patriot Joel Borda. And one of the things I've been thinking of is with Assyrian Protestants. Of course, I'm evangelical. I'm really concerned about the Catholic Church right now, because there's a lot of attacks against evangel. I think we should pursue Christian unity, and yet all these attacks. Catholics attacking evangelical and Protestantism all the time. I don't know where that came from, why they're doing it. A lot of hostility. It's like I don't really have hostility towards them, but what do you do in a situation like that? But Pope Francis, I admire Pope Benedict as a Christian leader, but then we had a woke, radical leftist Marxist Pope as Pope Francis, and I was hoping that Pope Leo would be a moderate, because I'm really worried that you're going to have a schism in the Catholic Church, because you have Catholics who are devout and believe in what the Church teaches. It's like, does the Pope? This is funny when Pope Francis, he used to have the statement, "Is the Pope Catholic?" And then when Pope Francis became, they kind of lost its effect. It's like, I don't know, is the Pope Catholic? He's not pro-life. He's not for traditional marriage. He doesn't believe in human freedom the way that Pope John Paul did. I don't know. That's a good question. Is this Pope Catholic? And then we have the reality is Pope Francis was not going to allow himself to be succeeded by a conservative or by a moderate. So Pope Leo invited transgenders into the Vatican just yesterday. He has had positive meetings with James Martin, a radical so-called gay rights activist who should be defrocked and excommunicated, and yet he had a positive meeting with him. Pope Leo participated in some kind of bizarre pagan rituals of this climate thing with a giant black block of ice. He's criticized. We have an immigration problem in the United States, as I've talked about. We have to bring it under control. And here we're trying to have law enforcement so you can have security and safety instead of chaos. And here we have Pope Leo intervening, intruding in our internal political affairs of the United States of America, and attempts to bring order out of chaos and have law enforcement and safety. And here he is insulting our properly elected president, criticizing law enforcement. If this, I was hoping this man would be more moderate, but he's as bad as Francis. And if that continues, there's going to be a schism in the Catholic Church. Sometimes Mel Gibson talks about, it's like, they'll say things like, see, these are old school Catholics. The seat of Peter is vacant, right? They'll start saying these things, that there is no legitimate pope. There's already murmurings of this. So, and I'm also reading, I've been reading this book, and he calls them the independent Nestorians, And he's just watching he calls them the Papists. That's what they are. Catholics are actually Papists, where I've said this before, Muslims are not really Muslims, submitting to God. They're Mohammedans, because they say they don't, but Muhammad is like a god to them, The way they try to meticulously do everything Muhammad said, every aspect of his life. It's Mohammedanism. And Catholicism is about the papacy. It's all it's about, really. Fundamentally, to a Roman Catholic, to be a Christian means being an adherent to the Pope. But for old school Catholics, they understand the New Testament and doctrines and dogma and tradition. So if you have a Pope that's against traditional Catholic dogma and doctrine and practices, you're going to have problems. But Assyrian Grant, so he's over there. He's trying to bring medicinal aid, cures of diseases to the Assyrian people to benefit them with his medicinal arts. And he's in constant danger from Kurdish ruffians and bandits, but also he says, like, man, there's a whole bunch of, he calls the Chaldeans Papists. It's like, wow, there's a lot of effort. The Chaldeans are trying to take over the Assyrian Church of the East. It's like, a few years ago, this village was Nestorian. Now it's all Chaldean and Papist. They're really, they want to take over the Assyrian Church of the East. We shouldn't, in my opinion, we shouldn't let them have it, right? The Assyrian people have endured these attempts for over 500 years, a hostile takeover from the Catholic Church. Don't give in to it, especially when the Catholic Church is at the verge of apostasy and schism. The institutions become corrupt. Why? Why submit to the Catholic Church when it's a time of disarray? Why? Why not just maintain faithfulness and fidelity to the traditions that came at the hands of Thomas and Thaddeus? Why give in? Don't surrender. Don't surrender. And I kind of wonder, Protestants, we've led the way, Assyrian Protestants have led the way in the past. Maybe it's time for us to rise to the occasion once again. I also want to mention a book called Potential by Steve Netness. I have a copy of it. I met Steve Netness a few years ago, and I want to recommend that book in dealing with the situation, the issues confronting the Assyrian people. So thank you. God bless you, and please join us for upcoming programs.